Hi everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about 5 things that landlords and tenants get wrong, or these are popular wrong answers when they enter into a lease deed. And this applies both for a residential lease as well as a commercial lease. So let's discuss what are these 5 things. So the first thing is, they don't usually define the term of the lease right. So let's say the understanding is the term of the lease is going to be for 12 months from say January to December. Then let's say so mentally you're thinking, okay, I'm going to sign the lease on the 1st of January. I'm going to move in on the 5th of January. So when does the lease start? Does it start on the 1st of January? Does it start on the 5th of January? And this is something that will have to be agreed upon and negotiated in advance, because otherwise what happens is the tenant moves in and 5 days they're just shifting and they still have to make rent payments, which could be okay, but I'm just saying just get the term right. The other thing to consider when you're talking about term is what is the lock-in period. Sometimes I've seen multiple commercial leases, for example, where there is a lock-in period for say it's a 5-year agreement, and the landlord says, look, you're locked in for 3 years. So that is something that that as tenants you have to watch out for, and even as landlords to be careful as to what is the lock-in period and what is the actual term. So if it's a 12-month term, then the lock-in period could be say 3 months, or so on. But it can never exceed the actual term, because if the term is for 12 months, you cannot have a lock-in period for 15 months. That doesn't make sense. The other thing to consider when you're talking about term or the duration of the lease is termination. Now, generally, termination is of two types. Termination one is there's a termination for breach. So for breach means, let's say the tenant does not pay rent for 2 months or 3 months consecutively, the landlord issues a notice. Then the tenant has to leave, and really there's not much negotiating to do if you don't pay rent. Now, on the other hand, where a lot of negotiation does come in is what happens if either party, the landlord or the tenant, want to terminate, for convenience. Let's say the landlord finds a better tenant who wants to pay more. What happens then? Or the tenant wants to leave because he's found a job somewhere else, and staying there doesn't make sense for him anymore. So what happens in those situations? Now, obviously, all this discussion about termination will be tempered by the lock-in period. If there's a lock-in period, then nobody can terminate really during that lock-in period. Now, having said that, once the lock-in period expires, then what happens is generally in commercial leases, what happens is the tenant will say, look, I am running a business here. If the business does not work, then I should be able to terminate. But also I need some level of certainty that that I will not be kicked out with 30-day or 60-day notice, because look, I'm also doing so much of renovation here. I'm also doing so much interior work here. So therefore, I should be able to terminate for convenience. That is, only the tenant should be able to terminate for convenience. The landlord should not be able to do so. Now here, the landlord could say, I don't know what the landlord would say. He'd probably say, he cannot say that if I find a better tenant, I should be able to kick you out, because these things are already agreed upon in advance. So for commercial leases, that's an easier argument to make for tenants. But in a residential lease, it's not like you're doing a lot of interior work. It's not like you're running a business there. But probably the best argument for a tenant in a residential lease to be able to leave whenever the tenant wants, subject to the lock-in period, is he could say, I may just I may find another job somewhere, and I should be able to leave whenever I want. Or somebody may fall sick, especially during COVID and the whole health crisis. Somebody falls sick, I should be able to move out and go anywhere. So generally, whenever you're negotiating, and this is called termination for convenience, because it's not for breach, it's not for non-payment of rent. So whenever you're trying to negotiate a termination for convenience, this is an argument that tenants can make more than landlords can make. Now, moving on to the third thing, that this another common confusion that crops up is that people don't fully understand the difference between a security deposit and giving money as advance. So let's take an example. Let's say the lease is from 1st January to the 31st of December, right? Now, so it's a 12 months period or term. Now, the way an advance would work is, let's say the landlord has kept with him 2 months of advance. So the way an advance would work is from January to October, as a tenant you'd pay rent. And let's say you want to leave at the end of the year. So what you would tell the landlord is, look, I'm planning to leave by the end of the year. So November and December, I'm not going to pay you any rent because I've already paid you in advance for 2 months. So effectively, these are rent-free. It's a rent-free period. That is an advance. Now you contrast that with a security deposit. Now what a security deposit is from January to December, you will continue to pay rent. There is no rent-free period for November and December. After the lease expires, that is on the 31st of December, the landlord will come down and inspect the property, and he will see, is there any damage, is there any wear and tear, and subject to his satisfaction, or he will, if there's any damage and so on, he will deduct money for the damage, and he will pay you the security deposit within an agreed time frame. And you have to discuss this in advance. If I'm giving a security deposit as a tenant, when am I going to get it back? Now, generally speaking, obviously, a landlord will favor a security deposit, a tenant will favor an advance. So, you should negotiate accordingly and see what you can get. So that is the third thing. The fourth thing to keep in mind when you're entering into a lease deed is how much, who's going to pay the property tax for the, premises. Is there any GST that's due? For commercial leases, I think it's 18%. For residential leases, there is no GST, so you don't have to enter into that if you're signing a residential lease. The other thing is, what about electricity? What about water? These things, how will they be provided? And these are things that have to be discussed in advance. Now, the final thing the fifth thing is registration and stamp duty. If you are entering into a lease, please get the lease registered for your own sake, because I've heard these things before that, okay, if the lease is less than 11 months or 12 months, then you don't need to get it registered. Let me clarify, even if the lease is for 1 day, you'll have to get it registered. So do yourself a favor, get it registered, because that way when you go to court, that is actually admissible in evidence. So, and that's a whole another story, maybe we can talk about that some other day. But make sure that you get, you do it on stamp paper, and that you get the document registered. So those were the 5 things, and thank you for watching. I hope that was helpful.